Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
Now let me move on to Eloy for his remarks. Then we'll go to Joseph, Ngatia, and Demba for their remarks. Over to you, Eloy.
Yes, thank you, Hubert. I'm talking from the perspective of somebody who lives in a country where 1/3 of the land is below sea level, and by the end of the century, 2/3 will be below sea level. And it will be no surprise to you that this had led to a long tradition of building very robust water management infrastructure in the Netherlands, starting, of course, with dikes, but also water locks and the whole water supply system. Now regulation obviously is important, and I would like to stress here that it's also important to decentralize at the same time. So you actually, if you look at the tradition of the Netherlands, the first forms of government were actually water authorities, which were actually quite decentralized in their setup. And they were very successful because there was a willingness for the people living in that area of that water authority to actually be taxed and pay for the water management infrastructure that was being put in place. So you're generating revenue streams that would allow investors, long-term investors, to tap into that market. So it's really actually, I'm always surprised when I actually look at the history of this business in the Netherlands, that we still have bonds which are issued in the 17th century, which are still paying interest, which are issued by water authorities, which still exists on a decentralized level. So now, to give you an example, a bond that was issued for 1,000 guilders in 1640, in today's money, that would be like 5 million, euros. It paid an interest of 5%. Today, that bond is valued at about at a market price of about 300 euros. It's still paying interest, about 11 euros interest per year. Some are perpetual bonds that are similar to that. But if you think about the amount of wealth was generated by the issuance in that point in time by these financial instruments, but there was apparently an environment that people were willing to buy 400-year bonds, because there was some sense that the wealth that would be generated by building dikes and facilitating agriculture and whole industries behind those dikes was such that they could easily be paid the interest. So on the one hand, it's a willingness to tax and pay, and also an ability to structure these things with a view of bringing in the private sector together with local authorities to actually structure very good long-term investments. And to give you an example of how that is done today, pension funds work together. When I was at PGGM, we established a joint venture with one of the large engineering firms in the Netherlands, BAM. We put 1 billion euros into that joint venture, and we would bid for large contracts in the Netherlands to build new locks, to renew dikes, and the government would then provide us with an availability payment for the next 20-30 years for the maintenance of that dike or lock, and that would become a great investment for the pension fund to actually hedge its long-term liabilities. So bringing long-term capital to the table with good framework for public-private partnerships, and indeed stable regulation and evolving regulation over time is important. So I also like the point I think Matt made, that you need dynamic regulation or dynamic solutions. And so there's a different approach here in the Netherlands for mega projects that go into the billions that are really led by the central government, and projects at a more local level. For instance, if you have a water lock which has to be renewed, it costs 150 million euros, then actually businesses in the area that profit from that new lock will actually have to contribute 1/3 of its cost. And then the rest will be raised through general taxation or other measures. So there is a good, stable regulation, dynamic solutions, And decentralization, I think important lessons from the Netherlands. I think that can be implemented in other environments. So although we can do endless studies on what is the best type of regulation, I would very much favor, for instance, in a large country like South Africa, you can start at a regional level, institute authorities which have the ability to raise local taxes or tariffs to pay for these water infrastructures, and then give them concessions that range into multiple decades, and then have a contract with the private sector that we will keep those rules in place for a long time. And if they don't shoot you over time, you adjust the mechanism for another location. But trying to maintain stability over time, so drawing that long-term capital.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.